All right, ladies and gentlemen, this evening we're going to take a little bit of time and talk about political systems, specifically focusing on types of government and beliefs about government. Reflects learning target number 1, our ability to recognize characteristics and fundamental beliefs of a range of government types and perspectives on government. So as you take a look at these questions, you are going to take notes on these items and make sure that by the end of this PowerPoint you do have a general understanding as it relates to these questions. If you don't, think about what you can do to help build up that understanding. The primary actor in the political system is the government. And government is one of those words that's kind of tossed around. When we use it here in Global Issues, sometimes we'll be talking about the person or the people who have power. Sometimes we'll be talking about more systemically the laws and kind of the whole political institutions. And when we say power, we're talking about the ability to control people or control structures or to influence policy and what happens in a country. Sometimes we're looking at people and organizations that have power, and sometimes we'll be looking at governments as a whole that have power. As I'm sure you remember from middle school, governments generally serve 3 primary purposes: protect, control, and provide. They want to make sure that the people are safe from outside threats. They also want to make sure that there is some order and control and that people aren't serving as a threat to one another. And then finally, there's some understanding that governments ought to play some role in providing for people's needs, or at the very least creating an environment where people can meet their own needs. Now, governments meet these needs in different ways, and people have different ideas about how best to do. Societies, different forms of government have emerged to fulfill these 3 basic functions. And in essence, what they really do is reflect these different perspectives about how a government can best meet responsibilities to their people. As we look at different patterns of government, we'll start first in thinking about some smaller societies, where there's typically a chief or a council of elders, and decision-making is often communal, maybe strongly connected to tradition. But these are places where a national government really doesn't have a lot of power and influence in people's daily lives. As we get to larger societies, we start to see a continuum where the government types reflect who holds power as well as how that power is maintained. At one end of the spectrum, we have democracy, a form of government based on the idea that the people, as a collective, have supreme power, and they maintain this power through elections. There may be direct decision-making in a direct democracy where everyone votes on everything. As you move towards the center, however, you see less direct decision-making, where voting instead occurs for leaders or representatives. However, people still maintain ultimate authority and control in their ability to vote to replace those leaders and representatives if they don't believe they're fulfilling the will of the people. Sometimes we see democracy called republic. At the other end of the spectrum, we have an autocracy, or an authoritarian government. This is a form of government which is based on the idea that it is a single leader or a small group of leaders that are going to maintain supreme power over the people. In these cases, power is often maintained by using police or military force to keep people in line, or sometimes by using religious authority in the case of a theocracy. And a theocracy is a government based on religious teachings, where a ruler is often believed to be chosen by a divine being or to actually represent the will of God. These 2 government types also vary significantly in terms of how the people relate to the government or what types of rights they have. Rights can be political or civil in nature, meaning they have to do with how people are treated by the government. They might have to do with the economy, or they might have to do more with people's daily or social lives. Some of the common political or civil rights that we see when we look at how governments treat people include whether or not they have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, or suffrage, the right to vote in what we refer to as free and fair. What exactly are free and fair elections, you might ask? Great question. Free and fair elections are centered around the need for universal, equal, and secret suffrage. Universal, meaning everyone is eligible to vote and able to vote. Equal, meaning that everyone's vote counts equally. And secret, meaning that people are not intimidated because nobody has to know who they're voting for. In free and fair elections, you see multiple political parties, and everyone in the society has an equal opportunity at candidacy based on the guidelines established within that society. In addition, free and fair elections are characterized by the absence of election-related intimidation, violence, or fraud. All the votes are counted, and the person who gets the most votes actually wins. Finally, you will see a non-violent transition of power. The person who gets the most votes wins, and they're actually able to take office. When we look at the world, however, we realize that just having elections and the label of democracy or republic isn't quite enough. In fact, the word republic is thrown around all over the place. Consider these republics, for example, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the People's Republic of China, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, known to you and I as North Korea, or the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These are all called republic, as well as the Republic of India, very different places. Ultimately, it's not about the label, it's about how the government actually operates. We have to take a look at what government looks like in the real world, because not all democracies are created equal. Liberal democracies are what we typically think of when we hear the word democracy. Liberal democracies have a balance of power, a system of checks and balances between executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government. Having an impartial judicial system allows the people to hold government officials accountable to the rule of law. Additionally, free and fair competitive elections allow the people to hold officials accountable to the will of all of the people. Having these elections at regular intervals with multiple viable political parties and candidates means that people will have a genuine voice in the government. Liberal democracies also provide guarantees of civil liberties, political freedoms, and political equality. These are laid out in the Constitution and protected by the varied branches of the government. Traditionally, this also means that the government is working to protect minority groups from discrimination. Liberal democracies have civilian control of the military. Since the people have ultimate power in a democracy, the military is there to serve and protect the people. It's not the leader's personal police force. And finally, liberal democracies are characterized by a free press, another avenue by which the people are able to hold the government accountable for its actions. Overall, in liberal democracies, dissent is permitted. People have genuine voice and power. In illiberal or emerging democracies, we see a slightly different pattern. These are democracies where they're aiming for democracy, but they're not always effective. Sometimes, as in the case of emerging democracies, they may just be new and not have a lot of experience in successfully fulfilling the will of the people. In illiberal democracies, you see that there are regular elections, but the degree to which they actually are free and fair is somewhat questionable. In the case of political parties, certain parties may not be free to compete in elections, as in the banning of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt prior to the revolution in Arab Spring. There may be voter fraud. The votes may not be counted fairly. People may be intimidated or encounter violence at polling places. There may not be a peaceful transition of power. Elected officials may not always be allowed to take office, but instead be imprisoned or placed under house arrest. In illiberal democracies, there tends to not be a truly independent judiciary. Government officials may